The Resident Evil 4 Remake was one of my most anticipated games of the year. Hell, it was one of my most anticipated games of all time. Seeing how it's a remake of one of my favorite games ever, does the game improve upon the original and leave the OG obsolete? Or is it a proper pile of dookie that makes you want to go back to playing the original as soon as possible? I would say it does improve upon the original in just about every way. It's the same basic premise as the original, with the exception of being a bit more serious and darker with its themes. Leon is an agent that was tasked by the President of the United States to rescue his daughter Ashley Graham from the Los Illuminados, a fanatic cult residing in an isolated place in Spain. Unlike the original, it shows a lot more flashbacks of Leon during the events of Resident Evil 2, and even the aftermath when he becomes an agent for the US government, where he is forced to undergo intense training. This wasn't present in the original's intro at all. I mean, Leon's monologue and heavier use of flashbacks alone adds so much more depth to his character than in the original. But make no mistake, he still retains the one-liner producing goofball mentality he had in the original.
Chief gave the orders himself. Help him, he said.
I'm sure you boys didn't come all the way out here to roast marshmallows. Maybe you did.
While still simultaneously being a charismatic badass with a conscience. Ashley is far less annoying in the remake, both in terms of voice and personality.
Your father trusts me. And I need you to trust me too. And do exactly as I say. I'm gonna get you home safe.
Okay. Okay, Leon.
Even better still, she's actually likable. Not only is she likable, but she's far more useful. If I'll be completely honest, she's also better looking. Largely because she doesn't have those giant-ass elephant ears like she had in the original. Oh, Jesus! Never mind. The relationship between her and Leon is much more fleshed out in the remake, to the extent where they have actual chemistry. Sexual chemistry. Don't pretend like you weren't thinking about it. Louis is the same cocky, charming, comedic dude we all know and love. Except in the remake, he gets the proper screen time he deserves. And there's even a section in the game where Leon and Louis team up. Aside from the cabin fight, I mean.
Then come, Sancho Panza. Let us rescue the Princess Dulcinea.
You're gonna hurt yourself.
Hey, that was my dance.
Sadler wasn't as present as I'd hoped he would be, nor does he have the playful attitude once seen in the original. But Jesse, the remake has a more serious tone. Like, duh. That's partly true. But Leon is still a charismatic, cheesy goofball, and Louis still acts like, well, Louis. So why couldn't they do the same for Sadler? The reason why it bothers me is because I enjoyed the interactions between Leon and Sadler in the original. You want to see the protagonist have more screen time with the antagonist, as it builds a love-hate relationship between the characters. Major voice crack. But the point still stands. I will say though, he does have a much creepier design this time around. The same can be said for all the other villains. Big Cheese looks like Mr. X, except he isn't a tremendous pain in the ass who is breathing down your neck whenever you try exploring. Zalazar is still an imp, but a far creepier one who looks like the love child of Chucky and Pennywise. Krauser isn't really creepy, but he makes up for it by being an anti-Leon, as in he's an incredibly arrogant, selfish, power-hungry dickhead. Ironically, this makes him the perfect rival for Leon. Then there's Ada. She's still a bad bitch, though her voice actress sounds as bland as plain Cheerios taste.
You can stop right there, Leon. Wouldn't make me use this, would you?
Mediocre voice acting for Ada and Les Sadler aside, the narrative is overall better thanks to the improved writing, more screen time for specific supporting characters, including the best merchant in video game history, and higher quality, intense action sequences. The gameplay all around is made even more enjoyable on the account of its drastically improved fluidity. This is especially true with the gunplay. It's really good. Like the original, you can shoot enemies in the legs, halting their movement. It's something I've always liked, as it adds a sense of realism. In certain games, if you shot an enemy in the legs, they either won't react at all, or they'll react as if you shot them in the face. Gotta love that logic. You can also shoot enemies in the head, stunning them in the process and opening them up for a very satisfying, well-deserved face kick. Sometimes faltering an enemy with a leg or foot shot will let you perform a bone-crunching suplex on them. A nice little detail, which the game is packed with by the way, is when an enemy gets close enough, Leon turns into John Wick, positioning his gun in a way that makes shooting enemies who are only feet away from him way easier. You know what else is easier? Reloading, as it can be done while moving. This is a big deal, because you couldn't reload while moving in the original. Aside from Leon's starting pistol, other classic weapons return, such as shotguns, sniper rifles, the TMP, magnums, along with several new weapons, like the crossbow. Or at least it's a remix of the mine thrower. Gonna be honest, it fucking sucks. It primarily shoots out regular bolts, which don't do that much damage, even if you do upgrade them. But if you're going for a more stealthy approach, then it's better than nothing. Fitting bolts with explosive mines, on the other hand, will obviously result in much greater damage output. Upon being shot at enemies, it will explode in their vicinity, where they end up taking a gnarly face shot. Yes, I fully intended for that to sound dirty. Here's the problem though. You rarely get bolt drops. Sure, you can craft them. Even then, obtaining bolts is much harder than any other type of ammunition. I wasn't using the damn thing for a vast majority of my playthrough, so I just sold it. It's a shame they neutered the mine thrower because it was my favorite weapon in the original. You also have a few new automatic weapons. While they're really fun to use, much like the bolt thrower, you rarely get ammo for those weapons. Grenades return, including the flash ones. As any OG player knows, they are extremely helpful against these head-bursting assholes. In the original, you could only equip one weapon at a time, grenades included. If you wanted to equip another one, you had to open up your suitcase again. In the remake, you have shortcuts that allow for multiple firearms and grenades on hand at a time instead of just one, eliminating a lot of tedium the original had. On top of the conventional ammo drops, you also obtain gunpowder and scrap called resources from either enemies or the environment. These help you make bullets or even grenades. In a way, I think it's cool because it allows you to choose what kind of ammo you want. Depending on what ammo you decide on crafting, it may or may not give you the edge in battle. Another edge you can get in fights comes in the form of the merchant.
Welcome. Got some rare things on sale, stranger.
For the price. I mean, obviously, a man's gotta make a living somehow. Lucky for you, you'll get a lot of pesetas or other valuables by killing enemies, with mini-bosses and bosses, in particular, rewarding you with the most. At his shop, you can upgrade your weapons, sell valuables for even more pesetas to upgrade your weapons with yet again. What else are you gonna use some money on? A diaper? For all the times you'll be shitting throughout the game? You baby.
Wish your enemies sweet dreams from afar, with a bullet straight through their heads.
The remake actually tells you whether or not a valuable is ready to be sold, as certain valuables can be combined with other valuables, making their sell value greater. In the remake, there's more enemies to contend with at a time. This in itself isn't a problem. The increased likelihood of running low on ammo is, though. In a game focusing a lot more on action and throwing large groups of enemies at you, there needs to be a lot of ammo drops as compensation. There were many times where I ran around the environment like a headless chicken, all because I was bone dry, desperately looking for ammo. In the original Resident Evil 4, if there were ever any moments where you ran out of ammo, it was a very rare occurrence, and you at least had your knife to kill some of the grunt enemies. But because knives break only after a few hits in the remake, you are kinda fucked in a lot of situations. The melee combat has a lot more options this time around. Not only can you still perform basic knife attacks on enemies, but you can also perform parries. When you pull them off, they feel incredibly satisfying, especially after they stun enemies. You can even parry an enemy who's wielding a fucking chainsaw. I won't even begin to question the logic behind that, seeing how the entire game throws the term logical out a 50-story window. But the absurdity is what makes it so damn cool in the first place. When enemies are downed, they'll often try mutating. If you still have a knife on hand, you can perform a fatal stab on enemies while they're on the ground, preventing them from mutating and saving you from a whole lot more hassle. When an enemy grabs you, you can even stab that personal space invading bitch in the throat. Stealth is also in this game. As long as you are crouched in the shitting position, you can one-hit kill unaware weaker enemies with a knife. But like I said before, every time you use the knife, it loses durability. I'm fine with the concept of knives having durability, but they only break after a few uses. You do at least find plenty in the environment though, and they definitely help with conserving ammo. The knives can be repaired by the merchant and, much like your guns, can even be upgraded. Gameplay centered around Ashley has mixed results. In some ways she's better, in others, not so much. Let me explain. First is the positive. Ashley no longer has a health bar, meaning you can save all those herbs and first aid sprays for yourself, like the greedy, gorging pig that you are. Even if she doesn't have health anymore, she can still get incapacitated. Sorry about that. If she gets hit while in this state, she dies. As I said in my review for the original Resident Evil 4, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Sadler want her alive? So then why in the authentic fuck are his minions trying to kill her? Same logic applies in the remake. One big negative is you can't make her hide while you clear the area of enemies. Most of the time. There's a reason why the developers gave you the option to make her hide in the original. Because she got in the fucking way. I can handle dealing with hordes of enemies, but worrying about Ashley while doing so? Not so much. The original had certain sections where making her hide wasn't an option, but it still had plenty of sections where hiding her was an option. Plus, you can't command her to stay still in the remake. You either make her follow close behind or keep her distance. Even then, she still follows you. As you can imagine, this is problematic. What an incredibly stupid decision made by the developers. Like the original, upon being captured, she doesn't even try escaping. If she started off this way but became more confident throughout the story and in the process did a better job at fending off enemies, then I'd totally be okay with that. I know she's untrained, but when people go through a lot of shit, it toughens them up as they have no choice but to adapt as a means of survival. I mean, look at Isaac Clarke. You don't get the same feeling with Ashley at all. To make matters worse, enemies are much touchier in the remake, as they will grab you a lot while you're trying to save Ashley from getting taken away at the same time. This is incredibly annoying, as I would have just preferred the enemies to full-on attack every time, then rely on grabbing. I will give Ashley credit where it's due. She's not totally useless this time around. She climbs down ladders by herself now. You can give her a piggyback where she then helps you open locked doors you couldn't beforehand, including optional areas with valuable loot. She's kind of like a power-up you find in a Metroidvania, except this power-up is much hotter and has boobs. I know the piggybacking was in the original, I'm just saying it has more uses in the remake. There are even times when she helps or even downright saves Leon, so that way he's not the one doing all the saving. My favorite example is when Ashley helped me against the fight with the Armaduras by throwing lanterns at them. The lanterns not only stun them, but also expose their hentai-looking asses for me to shoot. Ashley's playable segment is definitely scarier in the remake than it was in the original. In the original, you could throw lanterns at enemies and burn them alive. In the remake though, the lanterns are still used, but only for lighting up the area or even solving a puzzle. In other words, you are completely defenseless as you are being pursued by a ton of very clingy armaduras. The last point worth mentioning about Ashley is I thoroughly enjoyed the optional conversations between her and Leon during actual gameplay, as it helped make their bond feel stronger.
So, you do a lot of missions like this?
Well, yeah, but I'm not used to having such good company.
Is that a compliment?
Take it however you want.
The game does a really good job at transitioning between slower horror-oriented segments and action. The unforgettable action set pieces from the original return, except they crank up the intensity by throwing even more enemies at you in the cabin, including a Smitty small boss, or the entire mine section where you team up with Lewis and fight off a ton of ganados either on foot or in a minecart that you have to weigh down whenever it starts tipping, as ganados on other minecarts try killing you, including Jason Not Voorhees over here. You also have to worry about switching tracks, shooting down obstacles, and blowing up assholes standing in the middle of the track with dynamite sticks who pull a kamikaze attempt. Easily one of the best sections in the entire game due to how chaotic it is. And for Resident Evil 4, the more chaos, the better. Thankfully, they got rid of those terrible Boulder and Zalazar statue chase sequences. Yeesh. Although the Salazar statue is still present, it is used in a different capacity. As a matter of fact, QuickTime events are used a lot more sparingly in favor of giving the player more control. Although, like the original, it leans too heavily into action towards the end. But when the game does horror, it does it very well. And the source behind most of that horror comes from the enemies. For the most part, I think the enemy designs are a stark improvement over the original. They are much more lifelike and look 100 times more batshit fucking crazy terrifying as a result. Although there are 2 enemies in the game that are less creepy than they were in the original. The Calmillos, any butchering I do, I sincerely apologize, who do look a bit goofy to me. Admittedly though, there was a moment in the game where they made me produce a nugget.
Oh, okay. I thought they were about to...
Keep your dogs on a leash, people.
The Navistators are the second example. Unlike the Calmillos, they never managed to scare me once. In the original, they were these tall humanoid bugmen with long, slender legs. In the remake though, they look like giant mutated cockroaches with no hint of humanoid to speak of, which detracts from the creepiness they originally had. The best examples of improved enemy designs are the Garradors, who are far more terrifying.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
The Regenerators have always been leagues above any other enemy in the fuck-ton scarier category, and the remake is no different in that regard. And to add icing on that terror cake, they still make those lovely Antichrist sounding cat noises.
Oh, fuck!
Fuck are you?
Oh, Jesus! Oh, they're definitely worse than the remake. No, 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 no. No!
See? Even Leon knows these assholes mean business. As for the boss fights themselves, they are a noticeable improvement over the originals in terms of being creepier, having a larger pool of moves, and offering a greater challenge. I mean, the fight with the first El Gante alone made me go, God damn! This mutant Shrek was so much more aggressive. The Krauser knife fight is no longer a QuickTime event, but rather a fully playable, intense one-on-one fight. The final boss feels like a proper final boss, as it's much more grand in scale, and you're not attacking its main eyeball weak point a needless amount of times. There is one boss Capcom cut out from the game, my favorite boss, the U3. But the improved boss fight quality does compensate for the U3's absence. The way the levels are structured reminds me a little bit about the Dead Space remake in terms of everything being connected as opposed to being a series of levels. Another parallel it shares with the Dead Space remake is levels are bigger and as such include new explorable areas. Many areas in the original, indoor ones especially, relied too heavily on light, with the castle being the biggest offender for this. Now areas are darker and made much more creepier because of it. That, along with the significantly enhanced details in the environments and new locales, make levels feel familiar yet new at the same time, ultimately making exploration a lot more fun in my eyes. For example, the Hunter's Lodge is a much bigger, darker place with more build up towards your first enemy encounter that amplifies the horror, so by the time the actual enemy appears, you're shitting yourself. The farm now includes a fully functional windmill you can enter. The cave in the village might have been in the original, but it was incredibly small. Now it's this huge, intricate place with several different pathways you can properly explore. You can drive the boat and explore the lake's many new areas in a similar fashion as the Norse God of War games. Like the U3 fight and QuickTime events involving Boulder or the Salazar statue chases, several sections have been cut, like the lava room within the castle or the laser room within the island. But because they added way more than they took away, these are things that can easily be overlooked. Not to mention, with the exception of the U3 boss fight, I didn't really care for those cut sections anyways. One of the best examples of added content is a new room located on the island. I won't say what's in it. What I will say though is if each room in this game was in a contest that determined which one does the best job at effectively cleaning out your digestive tract, then this one would totally win with low difficulty. I'll give you a hint. It involves a wrench. Every environment gives you plenty of opportunities for exploring. Doing so will net you with valuables you can trade for pesetas, or new side missions to complete. The original had side missions, but there were only two types. The ones involving shooting hanging blue medallions, and the ones with the shooting galleries. Both of these pieces of side content return in the remake, along with brand new side missions. The shooting gallery is slightly different this time around. Instead of shooting targets shaped like Ganados, you shoot pirates for some reason. And instead of unlocking the bottle cap figures, you unlock keychain figures. These act as perks upon being attached to your suitcase. The one I got increased the likelihood of handgun ammunition being dropped. While the keychain definitely helped, it still didn't eliminate the lack of ammo entirely. The new side missions themselves aren't anything super compelling, mind you, as they mainly consist of killing a certain amount of rats or killing a giant mini-boss like this not-so-good boy here. But upon completing them, the merchant does reward you with a shit ton of spinels. Spinels? You know what I meant. These can be traded for things like sniper scopes, laser pointers, treasure maps for each area, and even valuables you can sell for more pesetas. All in all, the Remake's base game alone is a much more full experience than the original. The RE engine is easily one of the most impressive looking in the video game industry. As I said, the enemies look so lifelike, and this thankfully extends to other character models, not just enemies, along with the environments themselves and the lighting and darkness within each environment. Everyone's hair, Leon's especially, has way more texture, as you can see singular strands. You can see the definition in Leon's muscles, veins included. Motherfucker's built like a Nokia. Leon looks exactly like someone should look in his line of work. His face shows visible signs of stress, as evident from the bags under his eyes. The kind of bags you get when you haven't had a proper night's rest and have both seen and been through some serious shit. Certain enemies have visible body hair like the El Gantes. The individual fibers within the clothing each character wears is fully visible. You know what else is fully visible? All damn wrinkles on the regenerators. And don't even get me started on those physics. Forget about the boobs and ass on Ashley and Ada. The regenerators are where it's at. They got that jiggle like jelly. It reminds me of the hangover scene with the old guy who pulls his pants down and the doctor asks him to cough. Seeing how you have that disturbing image implanted in your head forever, I might as well talk about the gore. It's much more detailed as well. You can shoot an enemy's head off or blow them in half, leaving nothing but their upper torso left. The innards are strikingly detailed, including the still living Las Plagas wiggling around within their host's newly formed visible orifice. The enemies, of course, aren't the only ones who can be mutilated. Leon can also be sliced and diced. Leon's death animations are well detailed, but not quite as detailed as the enemy's bits and bytes. As for the environments, they are all disastrously breathtaking. None more so than the village. It's always been a worn down, disgusting place, but they really leaned into that aspect in the remake. Buildings appear as if they got hit by a shitstorm, and as such, look like they could fall apart at any given second. Graphics are a 10 out of 10. The soundtrack itself has some good examples of modernizing the music, while also making it feel the same, like the OST for the Big Cheese boss fight, or the music you hear whenever you save at the typewriter. So, the save music. The worst examples for me is the music you hear during large enemy encounters. In the original, it was balls in your throat intense, but in the remake, it's replaced with this generic off-brand culty sounding music. The OST for the Novistators is also another soundtrack that's been nerfed big time. As I said in my review for the original Resident Evil 4, it was incredibly unsettling and ominous sounding, as it did a fantastic job at making you feel like you were stuck between fucked and a hard place. And yes, I am aware they give you the option to switch between the remake and the original soundtracks. The problem is, the original soundtrack is locked behind paid DLC. This is sadly not the only example for microtransactions in this game. I'll get to that shortly. Spyro Reignited Trilogy allowed you to choose between the remastered and original soundtracks for free. Plus, the remastered soundtrack did an incredible job at modernizing the music while also making it feel the same across the entire board, in my opinion anyway. We need to place a shock collar on Capcom and shock them every time they come up with a terrible idea. All in all, the Resident Evil 4 Remake falls a little flat with its music. I'll give the soundtrack an 8. The final point I'll be making is the extras. Upon completing the game, you unlock New Game Plus, which has been around since launch. Yes, this is a good thing and should be included with every AAA game at launch. God of War Ragnarok and the Callisto Protocol are the biggest offenders for this. You can unlock costumes and new weapons for additional playthroughs. So yeah, there's a ton of replay value. Mercenaries mode wasn't present during launch, but it's available now and it's free. So I'll give Capcom points for not locking it behind a paywall. But like I said, locking the original soundtrack behind a paywall isn't the only example of microtransactions. The second example is upgrading weapons faster for the campaign, with those stupid upgrade tickets. Even if this is optional, it shouldn't exist in a AAA game that you paid for in any capacity. Timed up the voltage on those shock collars. Aside from the greed, the Mercenaries mode is better than it was in the original because of the improvements on the combat. Mercenaries mode is like the cabin fight amplified with the huge gauntlet of enemies you face off against. A really cool new feature in the remake for Mercenaries is each character has their own ability or mayhem mode. Activating Leon's ability temporarily increases his attack power and speed, making you feel unstoppable as you gleefully mow down entire enemy flocks like blades of grass. There's motivation to keep playing as you unlock new characters, levels, and even a weapon. Lastly, you can unlock figurines of characters, including enemies and bosses. They are kind of like the bottle cap figures in the original, except there's a lot more of them, they're way more detailed, and have actual ballistics. Much like many other players, I was pretty disappointed with the cut content within Resident Evil 4 Remake's campaign. Luckily for us, Capcom saved that cut content for separate ways, and it results in a pretty great package. Same as the original, Separate Ways takes place alongside the base game of Resident Evil 4. You get a deeper look into Ada's motivations and who she is as a character, including more of her badass bitchery, along with glimpses of her compassion, while also keeping the mystery aspect of her intact. I like her as a character, for several reasons, some more obvious than others. For real though, I understand Ada is supposed to be this really intriguing character with a lot of charisma. But the voice actress doesn't sell it as her performance gives off only slightly more charisma than an automated voice message.
Not a bad move. Very smooth.
Although I do think her performance is a bit better in Separate Ways than it was in the main game. Aside from Ada obviously getting more screen time, the same can be said for Lewis. This includes one of my personal favorite video game intros. It's awesome. Once you see it, you'll understand where I'm coming from. It was neat to see him and Ada work together on multiple occasions throughout the game, whereas in the original, they were only seen together in one scene, I think. Honestly, it's been so long since I've beaten the original Separate Ways, I can't even remember. Yeah, that's what happens when you get to be the ripe old age of 30. Villains like Wesker in the black-robed Vertigo also have bigger roles in the remake, whereas in the original, those two felt more like background actors who you would only notice after watching the same movie hundreds of times. Last story-related point worth mentioning is it's nice to see how this game connects into many of the scenes located in the base game. It gives you the, so that's how it happened feeling. Everything that was cut out of the main game is in Separate Ways now, and I think it worked out for the better. Whether it's the aforementioned black-robed Vertigo, the U3, although it goes by a different name now, along with the laser room, which is improved thanks to being extended, and including a chase sequence. Considering Ada's a spy, I think the laser sequence is better suited for her. Even the motherfucking gondola section makes a comeback. All of these changes make this iteration of Separate Ways mostly superior to the original. Ada and Wesker return in Mercenaries mode along with an additional level. Ada's Mayhem mode is pretty good, Wesker, though, is on a whole other planet, baby. Much like Neo was after his rebirth, and he just effortlessly made Agent Smith his bitch. I can't say anything that already hasn't been said in my review of the base game for the overall gameplay and graphics. It looks amazing and it controls really well. What I can say is because Ada possesses her trusty grappling hook, Separate Ways has more verticality than the main game in terms of traversal and combat. You can stun an enemy from a distance, then close in using your grappling hook and kick them so hard they French kiss the ground. Or use it to pull a shield out of an enemy's grasp. I can't stress enough how helpful this is. You can upgrade weapons in the remake of Separate Ways, whereas in the original, you couldn't. Many of the guns in the main game can't be bought in Separate Ways, which was an odd choice. Aside from the blast crossbow, there aren't really any new weapons. But even that's just a variant of the bolt thrower. Perhaps there are extra weapons in Separate Ways, and I didn't find them on the account of being a not-so-thorough dipshit. The save theme has a more calming, peaceful tone, as does the merchant theme. The original Separate Ways campaign, I believe, only had 2 bosses, one of them being Krauser. The remake of Separate Ways not only has 3, but one of them isn't Krauser, so that's a relief. I was kinda disappointed with the lack of new enemies, as there are only 2 I recall seeing. The U3 and some other monster you meet on the island. Yes, I know it's a small DLC. Nonetheless, it would have been nice if they added in a few non-boss enemies. You fight yet another El Gante, except for some reason hitting this one's weak point is more difficult than it was in the base game. If I can say anything positive about the fight, it's that at least the fight takes advantage of Ada's grappling hook, and the fact that the El Gigante can actually destroy the buildings you jump onto, which was a nice touch. The U3 fight in the remake was pretty great, ditching the cat and mouse first phase scene in the OG for a more head-on traditional approach. Still not as good as a fight with the original U3 in my opinion. Like the original Separate Ways, you do end up fighting Sadler. The fight itself isn't bad by any means. Even so, his weak point was smaller than a TikToker's brain, meaning you'll more likely miss than actually hit it. Sadler will definitely hit you though, including with one of his attacks that phases through a pillar and hits you. Matrix Logic 101. Even if you obtain pickups in the arena, you still end up running out of ammo before the fight reaches its conclusion. The fight all around was a tremendous pain in my perfectly shaped ass. Normally, I hate using the bazooka on a boss, as I've never used one up until this point in the remake of the base game or in Separate Ways. With this particular dick batter, however, I just felt like it saved me from getting killed a needless amount of times. Judging by the comment section of this one video I came across, I'm not the only one who feels this way. The final point in this review I'll be going over is the levels. You're treading across most of the areas that you did in the base game, with a few new ones thrown in between, keeping exploration relatively fresh, even if the levels aren't quite as open as they are in the base game. There's a mechanic within Separate Ways that reminds me a bit of the Arkham games, as you scan the environments for any clues that'll help solve puzzles. It's a neat idea, I just wish they leaned a little bit more into it, because it's only used a handful of times throughout the game. I mean, she's got the jam, yet compared to a regenerator, she might as well have a 2x4 for an ass.